July 2026. A warship slips out of the Berga naval base south of Stockholm, with fireworks bursting over her deck. And the scene is absurd for one reason. For 17 years, this ship, one of the hardest objects on Earth to find on radar, couldn't shoot down a single enemy aircraft. That changes now. HMS Härnösand is bound for the shipyard at Karlskrona to be armed with air defense missiles for the first time since she entered service. And when she returns, Sweden's invisible navy stops being a party trick and becomes a loaded weapon aimed at the only sea Russia has left in Europe. There's an old story that a Swedish security advisor once forgot his notes at a NATO meeting. Nobody noticed for a full hour, partly because Swedes consider 2 sentences a speech, and partly because the man didn't actually need them. The entire Swedish naval doctrine fits on a post-it. Hide, wait, sink. 5 words of it are even optional. For 30 years after the Cold War, NATO treated that doctrine as a museum piece. Then Russia rolled into Ukraine, Sweden joined the alliance, and the quietest navy in Europe suddenly found itself holding the keys to Vladimir Putin's front door. Invisible isn't marketing, so let's define it. The Visby-class corvette is a 640-ton warship built almost entirely from carbon fiber composite instead of steel. Every surface is angled to scatter radar energy away from whoever's looking. Her exhaust is cooled to shrink her heat signature, and her hull is designed to blend into the radar clutter of the Baltic itself. A sea full of islands, ferries, fishing boats, and weather that ruins a sensor operator's whole week. On a radar screen, a 72-meter warship reads like something a retired dentist would take fishing on a Saturday. Russian targeting systems can't kill what they can't classify. Sweden built 5 of them, and then, in a move so Swedish it hurts, gave their masterpiece almost nothing to defend itself with against aircraft. A 57mm gun, decoys, and national confidence. That was the hole in the design, and that hole is being welded shut as you watch this. Saab is fitting all 5 Visbys with the Sea Ceptor system under a contract worth about $166 million. Its CAM missiles reach out past 25 kilometers, which means each corvette goes from protecting only herself to throwing a defensive umbrella over every vessel around her. A ship Russia can't find will now be swatting down missiles aimed at ships Russia can. Härnösand is first in line. The rest follow through the decade. So why would Moscow lose more sleep over this tiny navy than over an American carrier strike group? Because a carrier announces itself from 400 kilometers away. The Swedes already answered this question once, and they did it to the Americans. In 2005, the U.S. Navy ran a war game against the USS Ronald Reagan, a brand new $4.5 billion nuclear supercarrier ringed by escorts built specifically to kill submarines. Sweden sent one boat, HMS Gotland, a diesel submarine that cost roughly $100 million, slipped through the entire screen, photographed the carrier through her periscope, and simulated sinking her, then reportedly repeated the trick in follow-up exercises. The U.S. Navy was rattled enough to lease Gotland and her crew for 2 years just to study the problem. Think about that arrangement for a second. The most powerful navy in human history paid Sweden rent to learn why it kept losing to a boat crewed by 30 polite men who all went home for fika. Part of the answer is the sea itself. The Baltic is shallow, brackish, and layered like a badly made cocktail. Fresh water sits on salt water, temperatures shift with every season, and sonar pulses bend, scatter, and lie to their operators. American submariners train for the deep blue ocean, where sound travels honestly. Swedish submariners grew up in an acoustic funhouse and learned to use every distortion as camouflage. Hunting a Gotland-class boat in home waters has been compared to finding a specific shadow in a dark room, and the man holding the flashlight doesn't get to pick the room. The other trick is air-independent propulsion. Gotland-class boats carry Stirling engines fed by liquid oxygen, which lets them stay submerged for weeks without surfacing to snorkel. A nuclear submarine must constantly circulate reactor coolant, and those pumps sing. A Gotland on battery and Stirling power sits on the bottom of a shallow sea and simply ceases to exist as an acoustic event. The Russians name their submarines things like Shark and Wolf. The Swedes named theirs after sleepy coastal counties. One of these two navies is compensating for something, and it's not the one with the simulated kill record against American carriers. Moscow has known this pain far longer than Washington has. In 1981, a Soviet Visby-class submarine ran aground inside Swedish waters, not near Karlskrona, practically in Karlskrona, within sight of the naval base. The Swedes have been pulling Russian submarines out of their archipelago since before most of you bought your first Volvo. The difference is that back then Sweden was neutral. Today she's Article 5 territory. And those famous boats didn't just survive into 2026, they were rebuilt. Saab cut each Gotland-class hull in half and inserted a 2-meter section carrying upgraded Stirling engines, then packed in new sonar, new electronic warfare suites, and hardened cyber defenses. HMS Gotland came back in 2018, Upland in 2020, and Halland, the last of the three, relaunched in 2025, completing the set. Around 20 of the systems in these refreshed boats are the same ones going into Sweden's next-generation submarines, so the old fleet is already running tomorrow's technology. So, count it with me. 5 stealth corvettes, 3 upgraded submarines of the class the US Navy couldn't track. Now look at the map, because the map is where this becomes a nightmare with Putin's name on it. Russia touches the Baltic in exactly 2 places: St. Petersburg at the far eastern end and Kaliningrad, a stranded exclave wedged between Poland and Lithuania. Every warship, every oil tanker, every kilo of cargo leaving those ports has one route to the world's oceans: west, down the length of the Baltic, and out through the Danish Straits. After Finland and Sweden joined NATO, every kilometer of that route runs past Alliance coastline. A British defense assessment published in April 2026 put it bluntly. The encirclement of Russia's Baltic Fleet is essentially complete. Its surface ships cannot break out without continuous NATO observation, and its naval infantry has been so chewed up in Ukraine that rebuilding it will take years. Dead center on that route sits the island of Gotland. Sweden's Supreme Commander Michael Claesen says whoever controls Gotland controls the central Baltic. And he considers it entirely reasonable that Putin might one day grab a sliver of the island just to test whether NATO's promises are real. The embarrassing part is that after the Cold War, Sweden essentially abandoned Gotland. For years, the most strategically valuable island in Northern Europe was defended primarily by sheep and a tourist office. The 2022 invasion of Ukraine cured that overnight. Troops came back, then air defense, then permanence. Sweden isn't waiting to find out what happens next. This spring's Aurora 26 exercise surged more than 1,000 troops onto Gotland alongside allied air defense units, with an instructor corps nobody would have predicted 5 years ago. Ukrainian drone teams teaching Swedish soldiers what modern war actually looks like. The students had spent 3 years learning it against live ammunition. While the fleet rearms, the shooting war hasn't started, but the sabotage war absolutely has. Since late 2023, the Baltic Connector gas pipeline, the S-Link 2 power cable, and fiber optic lines linking Sweden to Lithuania have all been torn up, most infamously on Christmas Day 2024, when a tanker tied to Russia's sanctions-busting shadow fleet was accused of dragging her anchor across the seabed like a plow. These shadow vessels are ancient, uninsured rust buckets, flying flags of convenience, the maritime equivalent of a Lada with someone else's plates. NATO answered in January 2025 with Baltic Sentry, a standing patrol mission, and the gloves have kept coming off since. Picture the scene from that same month. A Swedish Coast Guard team in survival suits climbing a rope ladder up the freezing hull of a Bulgarian-flagged freighter in the middle of the Baltic night, boarding her on suspicion that her anchor had just severed a fiber optic cable connecting Sweden and Latvia. They searched the ship. Prosecutors later couldn't prove intent in court, and the vessel sailed free. Which tells you exactly why this fight is so maddening. An anchor drag is deniable. A rusty tanker is expendable. The damage to a power cable is very, very real. Sweden now stations vessels at sea every single day for this. The invisible navy has a visible job, and it's part traffic cop, part bouncer. Follow the money and the stakes get uglier. The Baltic isn't just Russia's naval corridor. It's a financial artery. Shadow Fleet tankers hauling oil and liquefied gas out of Russian ports fund the same war machine currently grinding through Ukraine, which means every one of those rust buckets steaming past Gotland is functionally a floating paycheck for the front line. Claesson has made that connection out loud. Choke this sea and you don't just embarrass a fleet, you squeeze a budget. Then came the summer of 2026, when Sweden's Quiet Baltic project went international. On June 29th, Poland signed a $4.83 billion contract with Saab for 3 A26 Blekinge-class submarines, reported as NATO's biggest expansion of Baltic undersea power since the Cold War. And the two countries stapled a new Baltic Sea Pact on top of it. Warsaw even gets a loaner. The Swedish submarine Södermanland, leased to Poland so Polish crews can train while their boats are built. The A26 itself is a Baltic predator with a feature no Russian admiral enjoys reading about. A multi-mission portal in the bow, a flooded hangar that launches combat divers and underwater drones. And according to analysis from TVP World, fitted with cruise missiles, these boats could reach Kaliningrad, St. Petersburg, and even the Moscow region from the central Baltic. The caveat, the program is late. Sweden's own first A26 has slipped to 2031 because the Karlskrona yard hadn't built a submarine from scratch since the 90s, and restarting that production line proved harder than expected. The boats are coming slowly, so is winter, and the Russians know how that story ends. The surface fleet is scaling up too. In May 2026, on the deck of the very same Härnösand from our opening scene, Sweden's Prime Minister announced the country's largest warship purchase since the Cold War. 4 French-designed FDI frigates for the new Luleå-class, a program worth around $5 billion. Each carries a 32-cell vertical launcher with Aster 30 interceptors capable of engaging ballistic missiles. Prime Minister Kristersson described the buy as tripling Sweden's surface-based air defenses. The French design beat competing bids from Britain and Spain, and deliveries run from 2030 to 2034. For a navy that spent decades hiding behind islands ordering ocean-going missile frigates is the Swedish equivalent of flipping the table. One more honest note, because this channel doesn't sell fairy tales. Sweden's rebuild has a soft spot, and it isn't steel, it's people. The Navy has struggled to fill crews on schedule, and the older Gavel and Stockholm-class vessels holding the line as patrol ships date from an era when the Soviet Union still existed to be neutral against. Hardware arrives faster than sailors mature. Stockholm knows it, which is why this expansion is as much about recruiting and reorganizing as it is about missiles. A stealth ship with half a crew is just an expensive way to hide nobody. If you're wondering whether Swedish hardware actually performs when someone shoots back, that test is already running in Ukraine. Stockholm and Oslo have delivered enough CB-90 fast assault boats for Ukraine's Navy to stand up an entire division of them, and Ukrainian Navy Commander Oleksiy Nezhpapa, who test drove the boats personally, called them among the best in the world. They're operating near Crimea right now, part of a Swedish aid package that bundled 10 CB-9s with 20 other riverine craft. Swedish boats are hunting Russians in the Black Sea while Swedish submarines wait for them in the Baltic. Somewhere in St. Petersburg, a fleet planner is quietly updating his resume. Russia's Baltic Fleet is cornered, but a cornered animal still bites. Kaliningrad bristles with Iskander ballistic missiles, Bastion anti-ship batteries, and corvettes armed with Caliber cruise missiles. And analysts at Carnegie assess that Moscow has deliberately shifted to warfare below the threshold of open conflict. Cable cutting, shadow fleet games, drones over European airports. Russia's Deputy Foreign Minister Alexander Grushko has publicly vowed that a NATO lake is something the Russian Federation will not allow. Strong words. Although from a fleet that mostly watches other people's navies sail past Kaliningrad, will not allow is doing some very heavy lifting. Because that's the actual nightmare. Not any single ship. It's arithmetic. Every export dollar keeping the Kremlin's war machine alive floats down a corridor where 5 invisible corvettes are getting missiles. 3 ghost submarines are back in the water, Polish A26s are on order, and French-built frigates are inbound. Russia can still sail the Baltic today, but the country that perfected the art of hiding, waiting, and sinking now guards the exit. And this time, all of NATO is standing behind the guy who didn't need his notes. If this is the first time anyone's explained why a nation of 10 million quiet people terrifies the Russian Navy, that's exactly what we do here. Subscribe, because the Baltic story is just getting started, and you'll want to be watching when it moves.